Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name's Simon McIntosh-Smith. I'm a Professor of Computer Science from the University of Bristol. And I'm going to talk to you about this machine called Isambard, which some of you may have heard of now. And I'll explain where it's all coming from. So this is something we've said several times this afternoon already. We're kind of interested in trying these architectures because right now we're kind of in a fairly steady state. We're all building clusters and supercomputers effectively from the same commodity processors, typically x86 based. But there are new alternatives just starting to appear. We've all been playing with these for some time in prototypes and interesting projects. But the time is just becoming right to actually try these things for real and not just in prototypes and an interesting kind of like slightly weird projects. So that's what Isambard is all about. And the reason why we've been looking at ARM, partly it's because the ARM architecture's been developing really, really quickly. It's obviously come out of the very fast-growing mobile space. That's something we always look for a technology that's going to have a long-term future, which is obviously very important to us. But also we've seen in the ARM ecosystem, we've seen how that's worked in various spaces where it's brought lots of competition, lots of choice, and very rapid innovation. And those are all things that are very attractive to us in high-performance computing. There are things that are catching our eye, like the vector instruction set, which looks really attractive for high-performance computing. And then something that made a really big difference was, in Europe anyway, the Mont Blanc project. And it's nice to have those guys here, where they've really kind of proven that we can do real HPC on the ARM architecture, and also help to flush out many of the very small issues that were just stopping people from just trying this for themselves. So at the start of the Mont Blanc project, it was really, really hard to get anything working. I was involved in Mont Blanc 2. By the end of Mont Blanc 2, it was actually really easy to get things working, and that's a huge credit to the Mont Blanc project. It's really helped make this possible. In fact, it was during the Mont Blanc project that I had the idea to do Isambard. It felt to me like, okay, we've kind of proven this should work, so now we need to actually do it for real. And that's where Isambard came from. So it's a project by GW4, that's the Great Western Four universities of four of the universities from the southwest of England. It's the University of Bristol, Bath, Exeter and Cardiff. We've teamed up with the Met Office, which is one of the really big users of supercomputing in the world. They do all the weather forecasting that you use in the UK and beyond. We've also teamed up with Cray, partly because they're based in the same region as the rest of us, but also in part because we really wanted access to Cray's very high-quality software tools. We wanted to be able to use really good compilers to make sure that when we're evaluating the technology, it's not the compiler that we're seeing, it's the actual architecture that we're really getting the performance of. The machine's called Isambard, named after this guy, the rather dapper-looking gentleman in the top hat, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who, if you're from the UK, you'll know him very well, a very famous Victorian engineer. If you're not from the UK, but you've been on the railways, you've probably been on something that he designed and built. So Paddington train station is all the Brunel design, most of the railways in the southwest. He was a real innovator of technology in the Victorian era, so that's why we've named our new machine after him. So that's where we're coming from. I've called it a Tier 2 HPC machine, and what does that mean? Well, actually, this is how we describe HPC in the UK. So a Tier 0 machine, those are the largest international machines. So sort of the Recon machine we were just hearing about, that's a Tier 0. The big DOE machines in the US, the Prace machines in Europe, PISDINE in CSCS, for example, those really big sort of $100 million machines, that's Tier 0. Tier 1, that tends to be the national machine. So in the UK, we have a few of those. The main one we use for my side of things is Archer, which is up in Edinburgh. Then Tier 2, they tend to be regional machines, machines that are operated by small consortia. They tend to be doing something kind of interesting and a little bit different. There was a recent funding scheme from our UK Science Council, EPSRC, which has funded 6 new Tier 2 centres. The lead organisations are up there. The Bristol one that we're leading, that's the GW4 Isambard service. And then tier 3, that tends to be your local machine. So most universities in the UK have their own cluster as well, and they're tier 3. So Isambard's a tier 2, so it's being run by a consortia. The other tier 2s are all doing slightly different things. They're deliberately all looking at different approaches for how to look at future architectures so that we can build up some good kind of hard data when we're considering future national machines. Right? So hopefully tier 2 will provide several different useful services, one of which is to inform future tier 1 procurements in the UK. I should say I'm very involved in tier 1 procurements in the UK as well. So I'm very interested in that. I want to know, can we use ARM for real national production machines, and do it in the relatively near term? So here's the specification. This is what's public so far. There's some details that are deliberately left out because they're still under NDA, but they will go public later this year. There's not much of this year left now, is there? But later this year, we'll finally be able to tell you things like what processor this is, what the interconnect is. Those are the main things that are missing. But what we can already say is it's a Cray machine. It's over 10,000 cores, so it's a significant amount of hardware. As well as having the kinds of tools we've heard about today, so as well as having all the GNU tools and the ARM compilers, we'll also have Cray's software tools, and this is one of the real differentiators for Isambard. So we'll have Cray's compiler optimizing for ARM here, as well as math libraries and other kind of performance tools, which is very useful. Isambard does have little bits of other things as well, so that we can do direct comparisons. So we do have small x86 cluster in the machine. We do have some KNL in the machine. We do have some of NVIDIA's latest GPUs in the machine. And obviously, across all of those, we've got Cray's compilers, as well as GNU and Clang and all the various things, so that we can do as apples-to-apples comparisons as possible. That's what we really wanted to enable for this project. The first part of the project's already installed. That's basically everything apart from the ARM bit. So we already have all the x86, etc. And the interesting ARM chunk arrives early next year. So we don't have that yet. We do have some early access nodes now, though, so we have been doing some work on the hardware already, which has been very interesting. So results. So we've had access just for a few weeks to some ThunderX2 silicon, so we can actually try that out, see what that's like. That gives us some idea of what we might expect. One of the first impressions is we get most of the things we're trying just work straight out of the box. That's fantastic. It's pleasantly boring, just to keep using that word. It's kind of what we were hoping for. Literally, it's kind of like download the code, unpack it, and make, and most things just work, which is great. And possibly a few years ago, that would not have been true. So that's a really nice step forwards. Mostly we're using GNU tools. We're increasingly also trying Clang and LLVM, and actually increasingly Flang. So Flang was a really big step forwards. For us, many of the codes that we're going to be really interested in are in Fortran. Still lots of Fortran around for real science codes, so that's very important to us. And so far, the performance already looks pretty good. We're really pleased by what we're seeing. We'll be able to go public with a lot of that detail a bit later this year. So we're excited that we'll be able to kind of give you that information soon. What kind of codes are we going to focus on? So I've mentioned that we're very interested in could ARM be a tier 1, a national machine? So what we're going to do is take the most heavily used codes from Archer, so from the UK's national machine, and port and optimize those and see how well they run on Isambard, how well they run on ARM. And I've listed, these are the top 10 codes currently on Archer as updated this year. So the mix of codes on Archer changes slowly over time. So most heavily used code is VASP, and then this is kind of decreasing order. Many of these codes, if you're into high-performance computing, you'll recognize these names. They're very widely used all over the world. So many HPC centers will be using lots of these codes very heavily. Most of them are in Fortran, which is maybe a surprise to some people. There are other codes not in that top 10, which are also important to us. So OpenFOAM, for example, it's a big CFD code. We'll be using that. It's actually just outside the top 10 on Archer. OpenIFS is another weather code. It's the one used by ECMWF. Very interested in that. WRF is one of the other weather codes. Casino and Lamps are a few others. So more than just the top 10, but that's where we're going to focus. I want to keep putting these lists up because we don't want to duplicate something that anyone else is doing, right? There's not enough of us working on this stuff. So if anyone else is optimizing those on ARM, please let me know. If anyone else wants to use what we're doing, also let me know. We'll gladly give you our versions of the code, our make script, all that kind of stuff. We're also joining in with the initiative that ARM has started. I think Geraint mentioned it earlier. There's a website where we're listing every way, all the best ways we found of compiling the codes and getting them running. So as we make progress with Isambard, we are putting all our results on that shared website so that anyone else can duplicate what we've been doing. So what do we already have working? So these are things we already have running on early access hardware. So VASP, so that was our most important one, so that's great. GROMACS worked pretty well. CP2K, just out of the box. OpenFOAM, got some really good results for OpenFOAM. It's very, very promising. The unified model, which is one of the most challenging codes to get compiled and working correctly, works, which we're very pleased about, and actually the performance looks pretty good too. So the Met Office, pleased with that. Snap, which is a code we work on a lot with some of the US labs, that's all running, and some of the rest of these codes are effectively benchmarks and mini apps. And pretty much all of those just worked, which is great. I mean, that's a real testament to all of the work that Mont Blanc and these other projects has done in the past on the compilers and the tools to get everything ready. So that's really, really promising. I've actually added a couple of slides based on things other people were saying today. I think there's a really interesting topic that's come up about vectorization and how important that might be. I mean, obviously today, we're all kind of interested in SVE, but that's not available in any of the hardware that's coming out yet. That's kind of a future feature. So we have Neon today. So how well can we use Neon today and things like that? And I just wanted to point out some of the things we've seen in our early results are that the performance benefit that we're seeing is often not about the flops. It's not about we've now got more flops to use, because we know most of our codes are memory bandwidth bound, right? So if we're vectorizing, and that's giving us more flops, but our code was memory bandwidth bound, it shouldn't help. It shouldn't make no difference. But we see performance benefit. So it's actually the fact that when we vectorize, we're often making better use of the memory bandwidth in the memory hierarchy. That's important. It's often not really the flops. It's often really the improved memory bandwidth that vectorization is giving you. And we've done some work very recently, which is in a poster that's just been accepted for supercomputing, where we've been measuring some of this. And I just wanted to share this with you, given that it seemed to be relevant. The first graph, this is actually some Skylake numbers. So this is not ARM. This is x86. And all we've done is we've taken one core of a Skylake chip, and we've effectively run stream on it, where we've run small stream sizes up to big stream sizes, so that initially we're measuring the bandwidth to L1 cache, and then L2 cache, and then L3 cache, and so on, from one core. So this is one core's view of the bandwidth through the memory hierarchy, okay? And we've got several different lines, and I'll explain what they are. The lowest line is when we tell the compiler not to vectorize the code, and this is basically stream, okay? So this is stream code. And then the next few lines are when we say to use either SSE4, which is a really old version of SSE, or AVX. The next line up is AVX2. This is when vectors had got to 256 bits wide. I should have said the previous ones were when vectors were 128 bits wide. Scalar width is 64 bits wide. And then finally, one of the big things about Skylake is it now has AVX 512, which is the same vector width as we have in Knight's Landing, in Xeon Phi. And that's a 512-bit wide interface into the L1 cache. So look, you've got 512-bit bandwidth, 256-bit, 128-bit, 64-bit, right? So this is L1 cache bandwidths from the point of view of one core. And then you go to L2, where maybe this makes a bit less difference, and then down to L3, and then you eventually drop out to external memory, okay? So it's often these bandwidths. It might not be your external memory bandwidth that's really driving performance. It might be bandwidth to on-chip caches. And this is just a simple kind of warm-up for one core from Skylake, but I have another graph. So now this is comparing different processors, right? Don't get too excited. I've got lines that say ThunderX2 and lines that say Naples, which is the AMD EPYC. But those results aren't actually on that graph, because I can't share them yet, sorry. But hopefully by supercomputing, I can show you those lines, is the plan. But I can't show you them today. So now this is a different version of the chart. This is a chart that's not for one core, it's for a whole node, right? So this is all of the cores in 2 sockets. KNL, of course, KNL only comes in 1 socket form, so that's a slightly different thing. But now this is, actually Skylake does really well here, doesn't it? Look, so we've got loads of L1 cache bandwidth in aggregate, so across lots of all the cores in a 2-socket node. Next down in the list we have Broadwell, so there's a big jump from Broadwell to Skylake, and they basically doubled the L1 cache bandwidth, so that's about what you would expect. You can see KNL has about the same aggregate L1 bandwidth as a dual socket Broadwell box. Now it's interesting, isn't it? Because often we're hearing performance results saying, you know what, a KNL sometimes is about the same performance as a dual socket something else. Well, maybe it's when these sorts of things actually kick in, right? When this is your limiting factor, this might be why that's happening and not just peak flops or something else. You can see the stepping from L1 down to L2 and then off down to L3 and beyond. And we have got some IBM power numbers in here. There's power 8. It's not so sterling in the early days, but actually once you get out to sort of L2, L3, bigger caches, actually power does pretty well. So some of these things are not maybe what you would have expected, but vectorization isn't just about the flops. It's often really about the memory hierarchy. So more about that when I can share all of the other results, but I thought that might be useful to bring up while we're here. And certainly for us, when we're looking at the performance of the ThunderX2 hardware that we have access to, sometimes where we're seeing a performance result we weren't expecting, where we don't seem to be getting the performance we might have expected from external memory, it's actually, when you look at it, a lot of the code is running in cache. And it's down to this sort of thing when that happens. So I think the performance of the cache hierarchy might be even more important in the near term than we've been used to in the past. So what's happening next with Isambard? Well, now we're starting to get hardware. We can start to do some fun things. So we actually have our first hackathon planned. We've got a 2-day intensive session organised at the Cray offices in Bristol, coming up at the start of November. All of the GW4 universities are getting together. We're bringing our top codes that we're going to focus on. The fun thing is we've got some of the applications developers coming to join us as well. I think we have the CP2K developers are confirmed going to join us. We're hoping some of the GROMACS guys can come as well. The unified mod is actually the Met Office's own code, so they're coming along with that too, so that should be great fun. We will actually have access to the Cray software tools at this point, so everything we've done to date has been with GNU and with Clang, so that would be very exciting as well, to see what difference that's going to have. So this is our first event. Our goal is to then start to run more of them. The first one will still be before everything has gone public, so that's going to be a kind of invitation only. Once everything's gone public, we'll start to have public hackathons, so we'll invite people along, we'll make them open, you can come and join us. That will probably be early next year, so watch this space. And hot off the press, we've just in the last few days learned we've been shortlisted for a fairly prestigious prize in the UK. The Times Higher Education is something, if you're in the UK university community, the Times Higher Education is something we all follow. And they have a category called the Technological Innovation of the Year, which I didn't even know existed until someone brought it to our attention earlier this year. So we submitted Isambard for that, and we've actually been shortlisted. So we might win something quite cool because of that. I think it's the end of November we'll find out who the winners are. So ARM in HPC is making waves, right? That's the exciting thing I want you all to take away from this. And it's starting to become possible to use this for production science. That's the goal of Isambard. This isn't really an experiment. I hope it will be successful if it is boring. If it is just a production machine that people apply to have time on, to run their codes, just like any other cluster. Right? That's what we're hoping we'll find. There's bound to be all sorts of little issues that will actually come out when we try this for real, because this is the first one. But somebody had to try first, and we figured we may as well do that and see what happens. But hopefully, once we get past all the niggles that we'll have at the beginning, it should just be another cluster that you'll just use for production science. And then ARM is in the mainstream of HPC, which would be fantastic. So there are exciting times coming. In the short term, I think we're going to see greater choice, more competition, and hopefully a greater rate of innovation. And this isn't just for prototypes, this is now for production science, right? That's the change. That's really what's happened this year that wasn't possible before. In the long term, I think there's potential for more disruption. I think there could be more innovation that could bring some really big changes, and that's really exciting. And we need to be ready to exploit these technologies. I think the people in this room are making it happen. I'm very pleased that almost anyone who's actually going to use ARM in HPC has said we need to work together as a community. That's great. We're all saying that, and we need to make sure we actually do it, and we are sharing what we're doing, and we're taking advantage of what each other is doing. I think the spirit is there. We just need to figure out how to do that for real, and then hopefully we'll all get to benefit from that. So if you'd like some more information, there's a website. I think if you Google search Isambard HPC, it's the top hit is the website for the project, so you can go and have a look. You can follow me on Twitter. I post news about this if you're interested in following that. And one last little plug, we're actually looking for more HPC people in computer science in Bristol. If anyone would like a job, come and talk to me. This is the kind of thing that we're working on. So thank you very much. That's everything I had. Thank you.